until you have made that leap of knowing Him, okay, and confessing that to Him and speaking it to Him. You know, Vietnam became a real costly war for us for one real reason. It wasn't, the reason why we didn't quit in Vietnam wasn't because we cared so much about the honor of Vietnam. It was because we cared about the honor of our own name, right? When we decided to join forces with South Vietnam and say, South Vietnam, your war is now our war. Your enemy is our enemy. Once we did that, if we were to lose, or if we were to pull out, it would look very bad on us. And Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon all understood that very clearly. Once they were in it, how that war went would ultimately be a reflection on our ability to win a war. And it would say a lot to other nations around the world about our Constitution, right? And how much fight we had in spirit and ability. And so even though that war was a mess and went sideways, we couldn't quit on it because it was our name involved now. And America's pride and reputation was on the line, right? And that's why we hung in there and took all those losses. Well, I want you to understand in the same way, and I use that as a negative to prove the positive of God, that if you reach out to God and you say, God, I trust in you. I'm making you my refuge and my strength. I'm putting myself under your protection. God is saying in return, I will make your enemy my enemy, your war my war. And I promise you today, once God has committed Himself to you and made a covenant with you and adopted you as His child, He will not lose. Okay? And so, what this psalm is saying, which I hope all of you will say one day, that's a great and wonderful idea. Okay? And it's a wonderful thing for you to do, to speak to God and to say, God, I'm yours. I'm renouncing all of my power and all of my ability, all my will and ways, and I'm putting myself under your covering and protection today. And I promise you, once you do that, and once God makes your eternity, your protection, His responsibility, it now becomes His name on the line, and God's not going to lose. He's not going to allow His name to lose a reputation. He will defeat Satan entirely. Okay? And anybody He claims, He will redeem. I can assure you of that. And so my second question for you today, when it comes to this idea of shelter, are you looking for a handout or are you looking for a king? If you're looking for a handout, God is no shelter to you, period. But if you're looking for a king, if you're looking for a Lord and a Savior, He becomes a shelter. Okay? But that's an important thing to know. That there has to be worship involved for Him to be a shelter to you today. And without that, there is none. Well, the last point I want you to see in here is that our shelter is constructed with knowledge. Now, look at verses 3 and 4. For it is He who delivers you from the snare of the trapper and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and a bulwark. Now, I've used the word shelter throughout this sermon, and I imagine every time I've used the word shelter, you have envisioned in your mind a physical structure. And I expect you to do that. It's an analogy. God's using an analogy there, a word picture. And, whenever I said the word shelter, who knows what you envision? I envision a four-post simple structure with a pitched metal roof. I don't know what you envision. Maybe some of you envisioned a cave in the woods. Some of you may have envisioned a brick building downtown. Maybe some of you envisioned a $1 million mansion on the bluff overlooking the ocean. Maybe that's your idea of a shelter. But my idea of a shelter is just that simple four-post structure with a pitched metal roof. But whatever it was in your mind, you need to kind of jettison that now. Because obviously when we're talking about this shelter that God is to you and to me, it's not a physical structure. The shelter that God gives you is His truth or His faithfulness. Okay? It's the idea that He is faithful. And this shelter of God's is no physical structure. It is His faithfulness. And God is hardly faithful in your mind because I say so. All right, I want you to understand that today. Just because I tell you God is faithful does not mean that he becomes so to you. How do you know that he's faithful? By trying him. Okay? I could sit here all day and tell you God is faithful, and you would not believe it. Or even if you do believe it, you wouldn't know it. And God would not be a shelter just because you said, you know what, maybe he is faithful. When it talks here about a shield and a bulwark, the shield and the bulwark is our knowledge that he's faithful, our knowledge of him, our knowing the truth about him. Okay? He is faithful because you've tried him, because you've claimed his promises, because you've knocked on his door, because you've applied his law to your life. And that's what's wonderful about this. The more you try God, the more you claim his promises, the more you knock on the door and he answers. The more you apply the law and you see the fruit of it in your mind and in your heart as you get joy and peace and self-control and all the other things, then you're going to say, you know what? God is faithful. The words that God says are true. And that knowledge that he's faithful becomes the shield and the bulwark in your life. That knowledge of who he is. Again, not trivial knowledge, not like, answering a trivia question, and not some intellectual understanding, but rather knowing that he's faithful. That's what becomes the shield and the bulwark in your life. Our shelter is constructed when we live the Word. And so there you are today. I know this is an awful world to live in. I know it's I hate Satan. I hate him. And I hate what he does. And he's a liar, and he's a tempter and a deceiver, and he is very, very successful at what he does. He makes a good case against us every day. My point to you is this, okay? You cannot make it living in the wild, in the wilderness anymore. You can't make it as a spiritual savage out there. The elements are too great. And when you're exposed to them, he wins. You need to seek shelter in the Lord today in a spiritual sense. And that shelter is not something you could just go into today. I'm afraid I have to tell you that. You can begin today. Because to enter into that shelter today requires that you make a decision. It requires for you to decide what you think about God. And whether you're willing to humble yourself. And then it involves worshiping him, coming to know him. And finally, it really involves trying him over time. So whatever is most pressing in your life today, and I know you all have things pressing on you, you need to claim a promise today. You need to try him. You need to live the Word. And as you do all of these things, he becomes a shelter to you. So I wish I could tell you you could do it right now, but probably you can't. But you can begin the construction of it today by reading the Word, by making a sober decision, by reasoning, by thinking with the Lord, meditating on all these things, and trying him. Okay? The thing you can do today is get alone in your closet and have a prayer time. You can do that today. And that's the thing I charge you greatly, most greatly to do.